7 foods that are quietly destroying your metabolism. Let's have an honest conversation about something that affects millions of people every single day. And most of them have absolutely no idea it's even happening to them. We're going to talk about 7 specific foods that are silently wrecking your metabolism. And before you assume this is just another list of obvious junk food to avoid, let me stop you right there. Because several of these items are sitting in health food stores, being marketed as superfoods, and proudly displayed on the shelves of some of the most wellness conscious households in the world. You might even have a few of them in your fridge or pantry right now. But before we get into the actual list, I want to make sure we're on the same page about what a destroyed metabolism actually means, because it's not quite what most people picture. What a damaged metabolism really looks like. When people hear slow metabolism, they usually imagine the body just shutting down and doing nothing. But the real picture is a bit more nuanced and honestly a lot more frustrating. Inside every single one of your cells, there are these tiny powerhouse structures called mitochondria. These little engines are responsible for converting the food you eat into usable energy. Now, when your metabolism becomes damaged over time, those mitochondria don't just stop working altogether. Instead, they adapt. They become more efficient, and not in a good way. They learn to squeeze more mileage out of fewer calories, which sounds impressive until you realize what that actually means for your body. Here's the real problem. Your body has plenty of fuel available. There's no shortage of energy sitting around. But because of metabolic dysfunction, the cells can't actually access it properly. The energy is there, but it's locked away, completely unavailable to the systems that need it most. Think of it like being locked inside your own home with a fully stocked kitchen, but every cabinet and refrigerator is sealed shut with a chain and padlock. The food is right there. You're surrounded by it, but you can't get to it. So, what does the body do in response? It adapts. It copes. It becomes increasingly efficient at surviving on less. And while that sounds like a biological win, it's actually the beginning of a very real health crisis, one that leads to weight gain, fatigue, hormonal disruption, and a long list of chronic conditions that can take years to fully understand and reverse. That's what metabolic damage truly looks like. It's not emptiness, it's abundance that the body can't use. And what makes this so insidious is that the person experiencing it often feels like they're doing everything right, eating less, moving more, making what they believe are healthy choices. And yet the weight keeps creeping up, the energy keeps declining, and the health markers keep moving in the wrong direction. The frustration is real. The confusion is understandable. And the cause, in many cases, traces directly back to the foods we're about to discuss. Now, with that understanding in place, let's talk about the 7 foods that contribute most aggressively to this kind of dysfunction, the ones you probably never suspected, and the ones the food industry has done an exceptional job of disguising as beneficial, nourishing, and even therapeutic. Number 1, 100% fruit juice. Let's start with something that almost every household has in the refrigerator, a big carton of orange juice, usually labeled as 100% pure, freshly squeezed, full of natural goodness. And if that's what you've been drinking every morning, thinking you're doing something great for your body, I genuinely understand why. The marketing around fruit juice has been incredibly effective for decades. But here's what's actually happening inside that carton. When manufacturers process fruit into juice, the very first thing that gets stripped away is fiber. That fiber is critically important. It's the reason that eating an orange is dramatically different from drinking a glass of orange juice. Fiber slows down how quickly sugar enters your bloodstream. Without it, you're essentially left with liquid sugar that hits your system almost instantaneously. On top of that, most commercially sold juice is pasteurized, meaning it's heated to high temperatures to extend shelf life. That process destroys the naturally occurring vitamin C. So when brands proudly advertise their juice as being rich in vitamin C, what they're usually referring to is a synthetic version added back in after the fact, a form derived from cornstarch and sulfuric acid that behaves very differently in the body than the vitamin C found naturally inside whole fruit. But the most damaging element of fruit juice is its fructose content. Standard orange juice contains about 55% fructose. Now, fructose is unique among sugars because of how the body processes it. Every cell in your body can absorb and use glucose. It's the universal fuel. But fructose? Only one organ can handle it, your liver. Every drop of fructose you consume goes straight there, placing an enormous metabolic load on that single organ. And when you're drinking a full glass of juice, which can easily contain 21 grams of sugar, you're essentially flooding your liver with a concentrated hit of fructose that it was never designed to handle in that volume or at that speed. The result? Fatty liver development, increased belly fat, and the early stages of metabolic dysfunction, the very condition we described earlier. What's particularly alarming is that the sugar content in a glass of orange juice sits remarkably close to that of a standard soda. We've been told for generations that juice is the healthy alternative to soda, but when you compare the fructose loads side by side, the difference is marginal at best. If you want to give your children something nutritious and you're deciding between juice and actual fruit, always choose the fruit. The real thing comes packaged with fiber, enzymes, antioxidants, and a natural release mechanism that juice simply cannot replicate. The whole fruit forces the body to work, to digest, to slow down, to process nutrients in the sequence they were meant to be processed. Juice removes all of that and leaves you with little more than a sugar delivery system wearing a health halo. And let's be honest, a lot of parents start their children's mornings with a glass of juice because they genuinely believe they're doing something good. They've seen the commercials, they've read the labels, and the product presents itself as a responsible choice. That gap between perception and reality is exactly what makes this first item so important to address. Number 2. Seed oils. Now we arrive at one of the most controversial entries on this entire list, and one of the most important: seed oils. These include canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, cottonseed oil, sunflower oil, and a handful of others that have somehow earned a reputation as heart-healthy cooking staples.
You'll find them in salad dressings, margarine, packaged snacks, frozen meals, and almost every single item in the ultra-processed food category. Here's what these oils actually are: industrial byproducts.
Despite the names suggesting something wholesome, like vegetables or nature, you are not simply squeezing corn or canola seeds and collecting a pure oil. The production process for these oils is intense, chemically aggressive, and bears almost no resemblance to how traditional cold-pressed oils are made. The seeds, most of which are genetically modified and heavily treated with herbicides, are put through a high-heat, high-pressure industrial extraction process. They're bleached to remove the dark color. They're deodorized because the natural smell is unpleasant. Chemicals are added throughout. What comes out the other end has been so drastically altered from its original form that calling it a natural product feels generous. These oils are deeply embedded in the modern food supply. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 25 and 30% of the average person's daily caloric intake now comes from seed oils, a proportion that would have been unthinkable just a century ago. And because these oils are chemically unstable at high temperatures, cooking with them, or eating food that has been cooked in them, generates a class of toxic compounds called aldehydes. Aldehydes are not a minor concern. They are genuinely harmful to human cells. Every time seed oils are reheated, which happens continuously in fast food fryers that may cycle the same oil through hundreds of batches, the aldehyde concentration multiplies. These compounds penetrate cell membranes, disrupt receptor function, and are strongly linked to insulin resistance, cardiovascular damage, and systemic inflammation. Once seed oils are consumed, they don't leave the body quickly. Research suggests it can take up to 600 days for the body to fully clear these fats from cellular membranes. That's nearly 2 years. So the sooner you start eliminating them, the better. Switch to extra virgin olive oil for cold applications and dressings, and use more stable fats like ghee, butter, or coconut oil when cooking at higher temperatures. And the next time someone tries to tell you seed oils are perfectly safe, Ask them one simple question. What about the aldehydes? Watch how they respond, because anyone who has genuinely studied the chemistry of heated polyunsaturated fats cannot dismiss that question. The science on aldehydes is not fringe or contested. It's documented, peer-reviewed, and increasingly difficult to ignore. The shift away from seed oils is one of the single most impactful dietary changes you can make for your long-term metabolic and cardiovascular health. It won't happen overnight, given how deeply embedded these oils are in the food supply, but awareness is the first step, and cooking at home with better fats is something you can start doing today. Number 3. Oat milk. Here's one that's going to surprise a lot of people, especially those who made the switch to oat milk thinking they were making a smarter, more health-conscious choice. Oat milk has exploded in popularity. It's in every coffee shop, every grocery store, and it carries this wholesome, plant-based image that makes it feel virtuous. But what is oat milk, really? Strip away the packaging and the branding, and what you have is essentially a starch slurry. Oats are a carbohydrate-dense grain, and when they're processed into milk, you end up with a liquid that is extraordinarily high in starch, which is just sugar molecules chained together in a slightly more complex form. Starch is hidden sugar, and depending on the brand, additional sugars are often added on top of what's already naturally present from the oats themselves. What does this mean metabolically? Oat milk has a glycemic index that rivals actual sugar. Drink it in the morning, especially in a latte or smoothie, and you've essentially started your day with a significant blood sugar spike. Your body responds by releasing insulin to manage that spike. Your blood sugar then drops, and suddenly you're exhausted, foggy-headed, and craving something to eat again within a couple of hours. This blood sugar roller coaster, repeated daily, gradually wears down your metabolic sensitivity. It contributes to insulin resistance. It drives cravings, encourages overeating, and creates the kind of low-grade metabolic disruption that accumulates into serious problems over time. If you genuinely need a dairy alternative, whether due to lactose intolerance, a milk allergy, or personal preference, there are far better options. Unsweetened coconut milk and unsweetened macadamia nut milk are both significantly lower in starch, contain beneficial healthy fats, and won't send your blood sugar on a morning roller coaster. Always look for unsweetened varieties and read ingredient labels carefully. Number 4. Agave nectar. Agave nectar is perhaps the most deceptive item on this entire list. It sits on shelves in health food stores, right next to raw honey and pure maple syrup, draped in an aura of natural authenticity. It comes from a plant. It has a low glycemic index. It seems like the enlightened sweetener choice for health-conscious consumers. The reality is the opposite of everything that image suggests. Remember how we talked about fruit juice containing roughly 55% fructose and how that's already a metabolic problem? Agave nectar contains between 70 and 90% fructose. It is, gram for gram, the most fructose-dense sweetener you can buy, far exceeding high fructose corn syrup, regular table sugar, honey, maple syrup, or anything else commonly used in food. The consequences of that fructose load on the liver are severe. Because the liver is the only organ that can process fructose, bombarding it with agave causes it to convert that fructose into fat with frightening efficiency. That fat accumulates in the liver itself, contributing to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and spills over into visceral fat deposits, particularly around the abdomen. It disrupts insulin signaling throughout the body and accelerates the exact type of metabolic dysfunction we described at the beginning of this video. What makes agave so effective at misleading people is that its glycemic index appears low. But here's the critical thing to understand. The glycemic index measures how a food affects blood glucose, specifically glucose. Because agave's sugar is mostly fructose rather than glucose, it doesn't spike blood glucose in the traditional way, which makes it look benign on that particular measurement. But the havoc it wreaks on the liver happens completely out of view of that index. It's a number that tells only half the story and misleads people into thinking they found a safe sweetener. Agave nectar should be avoided entirely. There is genuinely no other sweetener I'm aware of that causes this level of concentrated fructose damage. Number 5. Store-Bought Kombucha tea. This one I take personally because there was a time when I was not just consuming kombucha, I was actively recommending it. I made videos about it. I genuinely believed in it. And to be clear, the concept behind kombucha is sound. Fermented tea full of beneficial bacteria, organic acids, and naturally occurring probiotics. In theory, it's a fantastic thing. The problem is what the commercial kombucha industry has become. When kombucha first gained mainstream attention, products typically contained around 2 grams of sugar per serving. That low sugar content was the result of proper fermentation, a process in which live microbial cultures consume the sugar over an extended period, converting it into beneficial acids and probiotic compounds. The sugar wasn't just a flavoring agent, it was fuel for the fermentation process, meant to be consumed by the microbes themselves. But somewhere along the way, manufacturers started cutting corners. Proper fermentation takes time, sometimes weeks. In a commercially scaled operation, time is money. So fermentation periods were shortened dramatically, leaving enormous amounts of unconsumed sugar still present in the final product. Today, many store-bought kombucha brands contain between 12 and 20 grams of sugar per bottle. Some add extra juices and sweeteners specifically to enhance flavor and mask the natural sourness that proper fermentation produces. The result is a beverage that feeds exactly the kinds of organisms you're trying to eliminate: yeast overgrowth, pathogenic bacteria, and fungal imbalances. It's the nutritional equivalent of watering weeds while trying to grow a garden. If you want the genuine benefits of kombucha, brew it at home and ferment it long enough for the cultures to properly consume the sugars. Properly made kombucha is also a wonderful substitute for beer or wine in social settings. It's carbonated, slightly complex in flavor, and has a calming effect that many people appreciate. Just stop buying the sugar-loaded commercial versions and start reading every label. Number 6. Bulk protein powders. Protein is not the enemy. Let me say that clearly up front. Adequate protein is essential for muscle repair, metabolic health, hormone production, and satiety. The issue here is not protein itself, it's the form in which it's often sold, particularly in the large containers you see at gyms and big box supplement stores, marketed aggressively toward people trying to build muscle or lose fat. Turn one of those containers around and read the ingredient list from the top. In many of the most popular mass-gaining protein powders, the first, and therefore most abundant, ingredient is not protein at all. It's maltodextrin. And if you don't recognize that word, here's what you need to know. Maltodextrin is a highly processed industrial starch, derived primarily from corn. It has a glycemic index that is actually higher than pure table sugar. It causes a significant and rapid insulin spike. And because it's classified as a carbohydrate rather than a sugar, it often doesn't register the way sugar does on ingredient labels or in consumer awareness. Supplement companies love maltodextrin because it's cheap, it adds significant bulk and caloric density, and they can rationalize its inclusion by pointing out that insulin is technically an anabolic hormone, one involved in building tissue. And while that's technically true, the insulin spike triggered by maltodextrin doesn't selectively build lean muscle. It builds fat. It promotes fat storage. And in the context of metabolic health, it does real damage over time. If you want to increase your protein intake, eat real food. Meat, eggs, fish, and dairy provide complete amino acid profiles in a form that doesn't come packaged with metabolic sabotage. If you genuinely need a supplemental protein powder, look for clean options with minimal ingredients. Whey isolate or a quality plant-based protein with no fillers, no maltodextrin, and no added sugars. Number 7. Industrial starches. Our final entry is perhaps the most hidden of them all. Not because it's rare, but because it's so ubiquitous that it's become invisible. When people talk about cutting back on sugar, they usually focus on the obvious stuff: candy, soda, desserts. But the far greater metabolic threat may be the industrial starches that are added to ultra-processed foods in enormous quantities, flying completely under the radar because they're not sweet and they're not labeled as sugar. These industrial starches include maltodextrin, which we already covered, but also modified cornstarch, modified food starch, and tapioca starch. You'll find them in crackers, sauces, soups, frozen meals, dressings, breads, baked goods, and thousands of other packaged products. And when you see the word modified on a label in front of any of these starches, pay close attention. That word indicates an additional layer of industrial processing, in which the starch has been chemically or physically altered to change its properties, thickening behavior, shelf stability, texture. The end product may be so structurally distant from its original plant source that it barely resembles the raw material it came from. Here's the metabolic reality. Despite not tasting sweet, these starches behave more aggressively in the body than table sugar in many respects. They digest rapidly, trigger substantial insulin responses, and contribute to fat storage and insulin resistance in the same ways sugar does, sometimes more so. The average person consuming a standard modern diet is taking in hundreds of pounds of these industrial starches every single year, compared to significantly lower quantities of actual sugar. They're not classified as sugar, they don't taste like sugar, but metabolically speaking, they may be even more destructive than sugar, precisely because their disguise is so convincing. What you can do starting today. I understand this information might feel overwhelming. When you realize that some of the foods you've been deliberately choosing for their health benefits are actually working against you, it's natural to feel frustrated, maybe even a little betrayed. You followed the advice, you read the labels, you paid more for the organic, the plant-based, the all-natural version, and somehow that still led you.
You hear. That's a completely valid response, and you are far from alone in having been misled. But here's the empowering part. Now you know. And knowing is where real change begins. This isn't about perfection. It's not about throwing out everything in your kitchen tomorrow morning and starting from zero. It's about making better decisions, one substitution
At a time, until the cumulative effect starts to show up in how you feel, how your body functions, and what the numbers on your lab work begin to say. Swap fruit juice for whole fruit. Replace seed oils with extra virgin olive oil, ghee, or other stable, traditional fats that humans have been consuming for thousands of years without the metabolic consequences we're seeing today. If you need a milk alternative, reach for unsweetened coconut milk or macadamia milk. Drop the agave and reach for raw honey or pure maple syrup in genuinely small amounts, and even those should be used sparingly. If you love kombucha, start fermenting your own and give the process the time it actually needs. Read the labels on every protein supplement and processed food you bring into your home and look specifically for maltodextrin. And begin to recognize industrial starches
for what they truly are: hidden sugars in a different costume, one designed specifically not to be recognized.
Your metabolism is not broken beyond repair. It is responding, logically and predictably, to what it has been given. Change what you give it, and you change the outcome. The body is remarkably resilient when given the right inputs. It wants to function well. It is designed to function well. The obstacles we've placed in front of it through decades of industrial food production are not permanent, and they are not irreversible. The 7 foods I've talked about today are not fringe concerns or conspiracy theories. They are documented metabolic disruptors hiding behind wellness branding and long-standing nutritional myths that have been repeated so often and by so many authoritative-sounding sources that most people have never had reason to question them. Now that you can see them clearly, you have the power to make genuinely different choices, and your body will absolutely respond. If you want to take the next step, I'd encourage you to check out the 7 healthiest foods you can eat to actively support and restore your metabolism. That's the other side of this conversation, and it's just as important as everything we've covered today. The path forward isn't about deprivation or restriction, it's about replacement and restoration. You're not losing anything valuable by removing these 7 foods from your life. You're gaining something far more important, a metabolism that actually works for you instead of against you, and that is entirely within your reach.